To give you an example, I'll take MS Paint option. Now suppose this is my application, and here if you see eraser button, I want to create a virtual object out of it. Okay, so first of all, before clicking on record or run, we'll create the virtual object. We have to go to tools, we have option of virtual objects. There we have new virtual object and virtual object manager. Virtual object manager stores the virtual objects which you have already you can see the virtual objects which you have already created, and new virtual object option is used to create a new virtual object. So click on that and then next. Now the window says that map to a standard class. Now select a standard class that most closely resembles your virtual object. I want it to work as a button, so I'll click on button. I want my eraser button to work as a button. I'll click on next. The next thing is to mark object, so you can just choose the area and then click on next. So it has identified as a Win object, and it will treat it as a button. So when you click on next, the name it has given is the default name button. We can change the name. For example, I'll give eraser, since it is eraser icon, and it will ask, do you want to define another virtual object? In case there are more than one virtual object, you can say yes, you can define a new object. If no, then you can just finish and you're done with it. I go back to tools, virtual object manager. You will see eraser object. These three objects are already created by me. These objects were earlier created by me. So if you see, eraser is the new object which we created just now, and it shows over here. So when I click on the object repository, you will see no object related to eraser. Now simply what I have to do is, in order to capture this object, I have to click on record button, and you cannot just drag and drop the object like we used to do in using directly the object repository. We have to click on the record button and then capture the object. So before clicking on the record button and adding the object to the object repository, I'd like to show you why in the first place we are using I've chosen eraser for this demo. So when I use the object spy and I click on eraser, you will see it will show Win object under paint, which is a parent window. Under that window, it is identifying eraser as a Win object and not as a button. So Win object is the class which is very generic class, wherein QTP is not able to identify a particular class for an object. In Windows case, for a Windows application, the object can be Win edit for edit box, or Win checkbox for checkbox, or Win radio button for radio button. But in this case, as you can see, it is saying Win object. It is not able to identify a particular class for that object, and that is why we are using virtual object for this eraser button. So as I said, we'll start with recording. I'll take my cursor down so that you can see what is actually recorded. Okay, so I'll click on recording button and I'll just click on this eraser button. So now see, a new script is generated at line number 35. I'll stop the run. As you can see, window paint is the parent object, beneath which we have Win object, which is not identified by QTP, and then we have dot virtual button eraser. Eraser is the virtual object which we had created earlier, which is in the virtual object manager. And then since it's a button, since we have assigned button class to that object, the default operation which is to button is click, which is automatically generated. Okay, so what happens is, I'll just comment this part. So what will happen is, when I run this code, QTP will click on the button. Okay, so it just clicked on the button. Now it wouldn't have been possible if to do this without there are other ways like descriptive programming and all, but if you look at it, it's not possible to execute this line. It's not possible to run click on the eraser button if QTP is not able to identify the object. Only if QTP is able to identify the object, it will be able to search for the object in the application and then click on it. So now we have taught QTP, actually we have made QTP learn that object as that it should be it should treat that eraser button as a button, eraser object as a button. Now when I go to object repository, here you will see paint, which is a window, and inside paint you will see the win object. Now this object gets added whenever you click on whenever you drag this object in the object repository, it will be saved as this. And as you can see, the class is win object, which is not identified by QTP, which is a generic class for all the objects. Now if you go further down, you'll see eraser, which is the name given by us. That's the logical name. And you'll see the class is virtual button. So normally we'll see that for a button, Windows application button, it should be win button. But here, since we had defined virtual object for the eraser object, it is showing virtual button. Okay. So this is like your normal object. You can drag it, drag this object, and the script is generated like we used to do it for other objects. Now one thing you have to remember is that QTP saves this information in .vot file. Now this is an external file. Okay, when QTP learns that in our case, when QTP learned that eraser object should behave like a button, so for that it has to save it somewhere. This memory, it has to save it somewhere, and that is your .vot file, which is an external file. So what happens is, you should have your VOT file with you. Suppose the same script, I run it in some other machine which is not having that VOT file. So during run, QTP will throw an error because it won't be able to identify the object since the VOT file is absent for that object. So you should have those VOT files with you when you're running the script. You can also use descriptive programming for virtual objects, which helps you to overcome the problem of .vot files. I'll be explaining you descriptive programming in further chapters. So for now, I think the concept of virtual objects should be clear in your mind. The next topic which we move on to is user-defined functions.